I understand, like, the budget is the budget. If they don't have the money to build the house, they don't have the money to build the house, but it's still our job. We're being paid to help them get what they're intending to build. How do I build what I want for the money or the constraints that I have? And there's always a path. It's a matter of understanding what's important to the client. I'm back, guys. Little end week. I fell off on doing this, and truth is, I've just been busy. It's a lame excuse, but it's the real excuse. So let me fill you in with what's going on and how it's relatable to what Tyler and I talk about on a pretty consistent basis. Had a project that we were in pre-construction with, and met with them. They wanted to work with us. We signed a pre-construction agreement pretty early on, and we had nothing, no schematic design, no drawings, a rough scope of work. And it was basically me driving to the property, meeting them, understanding what they wanted to build, and developing it from there. Said, hey, we'll vet the architects, we'll vet the interior designer. We'll bring the team together and we'll put together a successful project start. And we did that, and we brought in an architect. The architect was out of state, and essentially, was comfortable with working out of state. I'm not patting myself on the back, but because it was us, they understood our process. They knew we had a personal connection. They understood that we could execute the details that they were going to put out. Interior designer, similar. We made a couple of recommendations. Client came to us with the interior designer, and ultimately made the decision based on a previous relationship they had. But we also had a relationship with that interior designer as well. So put together the team. We start designing, and we're developing the design. We're putting together the parts and the pieces, the understanding. It becomes a very, very complex house very quickly, for a number of reasons, primarily due to its proximity to the ocean. Not difficult, but complicated foundation system, complicated structural system. Then there were certain parameters that the client really wanted to be within, and particular products they wanted to use. And we were confident. We had everything at our fingertips. We were talking with consultants. We were getting enough feedback to know that we could execute the project with very little question. And I'm going to come back to that point because I think that's important. But we ultimately, presented a budget. It was too high, and that's fine. We have been hired, and I think this is really important. We, or you, have been hired for pre-construction, and the process is to get to a successful project start. And I emphasize that because a lot of contractors will kind of give up, like, all right, you don't have the budget, then moving on. Like, I got to go find someone that does have the budget. But they've hired you to basically help them get to a construction contract. They want to build this thing. They're interested in building. It's really your job to help them build it. And yes, there is totally unrealistic expectations with many, and sometimes, well, we'll just say many clients, right? A lot of that has to do with them just not knowing. And some of these people have never built before, maybe have built similar homes or starter homes. But, when they're not educated or they don't have the experience, it's, they just don't know. And we had another client that, that was his thing the whole time. He's like, listen, I don't know what this should take. I don't know the process. What the process looks like. I don't know what this really should cost. And that particular project became very expensive and ultimately never moved forward because of that. And there's a lot of lessons that I can take out of that. But flipping back to this one, we understood, all right, the budget's too high. Let us exercise a value engineering, kind of, or, value engineer, go through and value engineer things and come back and get to their budget. This is where we went wrong. We basically looked at it as, how do we move the needle as quickly as possible, rather than how do we maintain the essence of the project and build something that hits the important marks for the client and is similar to what has been designed, but reduced. And it's, I wouldn't say it was like a blaring mistake that we did, but it was a mistake in the sense that we made these decisions internally, like, all right, if we remove this and we remove that and we reduce this is going to get us within our budget pretty quickly. And we did that, and they're like, but I really like all those things. And again, it's, okay, well, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like there is a sense that there is a point where, you just don't have the financial means to do this project. But I think it's more important than that. And it's really, you need to set some parameters to understand how you get to building this home, how you understand, like, what are you going to like, what is the client going to sacrifice, but how are you going to help them make the decision to sacrifice the right things? Basically, if their budget's $1 million, how are you spending that $1 million as efficiently as possible and getting the most of the project as possible? Because there's things that you can remove from a project and still get, say, 90% of what is intended, where, you might take out other things that, reduce the essence or just reduce we'll say the coolness of the project. And that can be detrimental, as it was in this case for a client. And ultimately what happened is that we went through this exercise, and I remember the moment that it happened. We sat down. I was like, hey, we can hit your budget. Here's what we're proposing to do. And it was like the wind was ripped out of their sail when I had mentioned a couple of the things that we were recommending reducing. And in that moment, I could see in the client's face that we had now lost their trust. And there's more to this. I think that in the bigger picture, I actually don't think that we were ever going to build this project. I think that we were hired strictly for the pre-construction side of it. And that's okay. I think, I reflect on a lot of this because I really want to make sure that we're constantly improving. And I think I missed a couple signs that, that was the overall intent here, is that we were hired for pre-construction to really build a successful project, but, had a lighter chance that we were ever going to build it. But that's besides the point. But in that moment, I remember the client just, I felt as though they've lost our trust because we've not done what they've asked. And instead we've built this, or we've pitched this diluted version of it. And again, anyone that's listening, I understand, like, the reality is the budget is the budget. If they don't have the money to build the house, they don't have the money to build the house, but it's still our job. We're being paid. And this part of, what we preach is, like, you got to be paid for pre-construction, but we're also being paid to help them get what they're hoping to do, what they're intending to build. How do I build what I want for the money or the constraints that I have? And there's always a path, and it's a matter of understanding what's important to the client. So, all that to be said, let's talk about the actionable steps that I've taken from that point. It's, making sure we have a very clear understanding of what are the non-negotiables, and what is important to the client. Let's fast forward. We have a client right now that we are not even in pre-con with. We've put together a schematic pricing set, and that means we're getting schematic drawings, and we're spending about less than a day putting together an estimate to outline the cost. And that cost is higher than she wants. She came back. She's like, this is more than I want to spend. This is my number. So I can quickly reverse engineer the budget. I can look at, this is our number. I'll tell you how we do this, because I think it's an important step. Say the budget's $1 million. She wants to spend $1 million, but the price the price is, or the estimate says 1.3. And that 1.3 is made up of whatever, 10 line items. It's going to be more than that, but 10 line items. I'm going to basically take each of those line items. Say the first line item is $10,000, right? I'm going to figure out what percentage of the 1.3 number is $10,000. And I'm going to put that in a percentage column next to it. I'm going to go through all of that, and then all of that percentage adds up to 100%, and the 100% is the 1.3, right? So now I know that what these 10 line items attribute to the overall cost of as a percentage. I'm going to then, next column over, put $1 million at the bottom, and then take that percentage and times it by the million and put it back in the column next to it. So now I know that the $10,000, if I can get that number to, 9,000 and so on and so forth, that it adds up to $1 million. And what that does is it sets some guide rails for us as the builder to understand, all right, we're at 1.3. She wants to be at $1 million. How do I get there? Let's talk first financially. Does it seem feasible? Because at this point, it's schematic. We're putting together historic data and probably adding a fluff factor to all that. So that 10 grand is just an allowance. Could I realistically, buy that down to $9,000? Maybe. And there's probably items in there that, okay, well, can you buy down a different line item, another 10, like maybe not. There's things that you're going to be able to look at and say, oh, I know I can buy that down $1,000. I know that one's going to be more difficult to buy down, 10%, but I could probably propose doing something different to save the 10%. And it's going to give you this kind of baseline of like, this is the target if I'm looking at this job, in the same way that I basically put together the first pricing from a percentage perspective. So all that to be said, relating it back to the past project, when we're doing that, now we're being a little bit more, direct in terms of like, all right, what are the items that we think we can buy down? And again, I've said this before, I'm not asking my trades to give me a discount because I want the job to happen. It's more of a conversation where, I've used the example of the paint before. It's like, hey, listen, I'm trying to get this project to $100,000 paint budget. How do I get there? And, the painter comes back and says, give me the whole house with no interruptions, and I can do this for 100 grand. And I've made the promise, like, you do the house. I won't, and I'm sorry, you will sign a contract for 100 grand. And if I don't give you the house, you can change order me for the 10 grand. But what it's doing is it's putting the burden on both of us, but the trade is still making sure that they're hitting their margins. I'm not asking any trade to cut their margins for my benefit. That's not a fair way to do business, in my opinion. So you're basically looking at, here are my parameters, here's how I can approach the project, here are the things that I can be, that I can buy down, here are the things that I can't buy down, so I need to look at that a little bit further. It's like, okay, well, dig into the specs. It's like, yeah, I can't, the tile is the tile. It's like, okay, well, if they've selected all the tile and you've priced it, of course, like that number is not going to come down. Is there, take that number and then dissect that is like, all right, well, that's actually made up of 4 bathrooms. And I know 2 of those bathrooms I don't really care about. So they just pick the tile. So, and that tile is $15 a foot. All right, well, maybe that's an opportunity where you could save. It's like, hey, in the 2 secondary bathrooms, like I'm recommending that you reduce the tile allowance in those rooms. I know they're not as important, and I know you're hard set on the primary bath having a particular tile. Like, this is what you're being paid for. This is you're You want the project to start just as much as the client. And this is why it's important to get paid for it. It's important to get paid because you're putting in the work and a significant amount of work. I'll tell you that most of our pre-construction agreements are $50,000. Sounds like a lot of money. I will tell you that money moves very quickly when you're really in the weeds and really spending a lot of time and making sure that you're digging through this stuff specifically. Like getting into the weeds of the secondary bathrooms not having a $15 square foot tile and recommending to reduce that by $5 a foot. And a lot of those recommendations, first off, are discussed with the design team first, because we want buy-in. That's a really important part of this. This isn't a builder versus architect anymore. This is a builder and architect working together and then presenting something to the client at the same time. But this is what you're being paid for, and this is what is the premise behind pre-construction. You want to get this project to a successful project start, and it is a difficult service to offer and charge for if you don't understand what the value is and you don't believe what the value is. It's not pricing the job. You're not getting paid to price a project. You can put together an estimate in a day. Sure, you want to charge for that? Go ahead. I don't see the value in doing that, because when you're selling something, the whole point is how are you explaining to the client that you're going to give me money for something in exchange for the value that I bring to the table? The value of getting a price, what value is that to the client? The client wants to know, like, what am I getting for that price? Are you going to be a partner in this? Are you going to help me work through the specifics? Are you assuming the specifics? Or are you just giving me general allowances that when we start building and I start picking things out, that you're going to tell me everything's a change order? That's a terrible process. And that's why we promote the pre-construction so much. We've talked about it. We've put together this course, and the course is something that we spent a significant amount of time with. There's over 6 hours of videos. It's a complete curriculum of walking through how we go about pre-construction, how to sell pre-construction, the templates that we're using throughout it, the schedule, how we communicate it, how we're communicating updates, and ultimately everything leads to a successful project start. That's what we want, right? We want to work through this process. We want to deliver the information in a way that the client feels confident in it and ultimately says, let's build the house, because that's the end goal. But through that process, you need to be getting paid, because you're going to put a significant amount of work into making sure that this project is successful. And learn from me and the mistakes I've made, and I will share more as this stuff happens. I had another one, unfortunately, not move forward. And that's primarily why I've been so quiet recently, is that I've been head down, focused on our pipeline for the next 2 years. But, you are being hired for this service, and you need to bring as much value as you possibly can. And I'll save it for another time, but the partnership that you build with the design team and the process in which communication happens between you and the design team is incredibly important and almost the backbone of the success of this. But start with understanding what this is. Check out the course, moderncraftsman.co. There's a tab up top that says course. Our pre-construction course is up there. And make sure you join our newsletter for more updates like this, more behind the scenes. And I'll see you guys next week.